So, hello, and welcome to the second half of the One Planet Left conference of Stiftung Digitale Spielekultur today. I hope you enjoyed the program so far, and thanks for joining this session, which is called Alba, a Wildlife Adventure, and it also has a subtitle Inspiring Sustainable Action in Local Communities. So the session type is called a Spielung in German. In fact, that's not really a word that existed before the Stiftung Digitale Spielekultur invented it. So basically, it can be translated like a gameplay session. It's an analogy to Lesung, which is like a stage reading. You know, when authors read from the book and talk about it, and that's what we do today. We play a game and we talk about it in related topics, of course. And yeah, I see you all there. Siri is also there. Jenny is there, and David. I will introduce you in a second. So, Jenny is the one who's going to play Alba during our session. So, Jenny, thank you for playing. And you may already start while I introduce my guest and myself. My name, very shortly, just is Viola Tensil. I'm going to be a host for this session. And yes, there's Siri Macaulay. I'm so glad you made it. We were a little bit afraid because you weren't there yet, but now you're there. And Siri works in the Youth and Education and Advocacy Unit in the Ecosystem Division at UN Environment in Nairobi, Kenya. So, are you really now in Kenya or are you at home now?
Hi, Viola, thanks. So actually, I partly work for Nairobi and also partly for our office in Europe. So now I'm
Yeah.
actually based in Geneva in Switzerland,
Ah,
so not so far away
nice.
from you.
Okay, so Siri, you do a lot of things. So I have like a bio. Maybe I just read it out because it's so much I couldn't like make it in my head and tell it by heart. So you have been closely involved in climate activism and you have a background in environment and research management, social policy, international business. That's already a lot. Previously, Siri has worked as a project manager in one of the largest youth organizations in Finland, focusing on environment, non formal education, and business development. In addition, you have a broad experience in research, partnerships, and communications. So before joining UN Environment, Siri acted as the president of the Finnish Agenda 2030, I believe it's called, a youth group advocating for sustainable development. And you have a master in economics and business administration and environment and resource management. Now, when I look at my bio, I feel embarrassed because I haven't done so many things so far. That's quite a lot. I hope I got everything, all the facts right.
Yes, yes, indeed. And most recently, for the past 2 years, I have been coordinating the Playing for the Planet Alliance, which is closely related to why we're here now today.
Yeah, we'll talk about that, of course. So, another guest is, of course, David Fernandez Huerta. Hi, David. You
Hello.
are the art director of the studio at Us2 Games, which did Alba. And you're currently working on Alba, of course, as the creative director of the game. Before that, you were the art director of Monument Valley 2. And previously, you worked as an artist, animator, and level designer for Monument Valley and Land's End. So, welcome to this session. Maybe I could ask our operator to maybe make the game sound a little bit not that loud because I don't hear myself actually. Let's just very quickly give you some facts for all out there who don't know about the game. It's an open world adventure game developed, of course, by Us2 Games, and it focuses on exploring the world and conserving the wildlife. It was released first in 2020 for iOS, macOS, and Apple Arcade and PC, and then later last year for Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X and S. So let's start with just that was a very short description, of course, of the game, but I believe, David, you can tell me a little bit more about Alba.
Yeah, so, well, as you described, Alba is a small open world photography adventure game. We started with the idea of just having a a nice space to inhabit. I take pictures of animals as a hobby, and we kind of like took that as a starting point. And then we quickly realized that if you want to make a game about appreciating nature, then you have to talk about what humans and nature do together, and how they relate to each other, and what, the good and the bad aspects of that relationship, and that kind of like shape the story and the experience. It's a game meant to, I don't know, be played in family, I guess. We kind of like thought about it as something to play, not just like it is obviously appeals to children by looks, but also is there to, attract like an adult audience as well, and hopefully for them to play together with their children. That'll be the ideal scenario. It's not very long. It's about like 3-4 hours long if you want to find all the animals to photograph and just have a good time saving the environment.
Yeah. So Alba has already been nominated and has won several awards. For example, Game of the Year and Most Significant Impact at the Games for Change Awards.
Yep.
When you were developing the game, have you been expecting such an attention and all the awards? I mean, you were developing the game like any other, or did you do this with a specific goal in mind?
Um, a little bit of both. Like, we didn't expect. Obviously, you can't expect awards. If you expect awards, you're in for a disappointment. Um, but as I was saying, when we started working on the game, which was more about nature appreciation, just inhabiting a natural space, we thought, like maybe that's enough. And as we were developing it, we realized that there was something without a strong message behind the game. Everyone like kind of like saw the game in a different way, and not necessarily in a good. It, that can be a good thing, but that can also, especially when you're making a game, can be a bad thing, because you want the whole team to be focused on a singular vision. And like, we as people, as humans making games, we really care about the environmental issues that we depict in the game. But we were at first a bit conscious that having a game with a very in your face message like that could feel like a bit preachy and put people off. So we kind of like delaying making that decision that we already had made for ourselves, I guess. But there was a turning point in the development when we said, you know what, this is what we believe in. Let's make it. So and kind of like focus our efforts in realizing this idea that the game follows the story of a girl that is saving the environment of an island. And of course, you have lots of different, like, over the last few years, lots of different awards have come up to kind of like recognize those efforts in the games industry. Games for Change being an example, Play for the Planet Alliance. The big award ceremonies also have their own, like, beyond entertainment kind of categories nowadays. So we did think, like, okay, like, that's maybe this is our niche. It's not, we didn't make the game to win awards, but we clearly saw that there was a space for us making a game that was talking about issues from the real world in an honest way, in the way that we think should be addressed, which is by community action and mobilizing groups of people, not just having this idea of the singular hero that saves the day and everything's fine afterwards. So yeah, a little bit of both. We were aware that there were awards that would fit our category of game, but we just did it because that's what we believe in.
Yeah. So, Siri, have you already played Alba, or at least looked into it?
Yes, I have looked into it, but I haven't played it. But of course, I'm familiar with it as Stu is also part of the Playing for the Planet Alliance, so we have collaborated closely. But I'm excited to play it in the near future, and it's really amazing. It's really cool what you've done.
So, you already mentioned the planet, playing for the Planet Alliance. So maybe just tell us a little bit about what it is, what their works are, and why us two has also joined the alliance. Maybe Siri, you start.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I start by kind of saying why we as the UN environment want to collaborate with the gaming industry, because that was kind of the reason why the alliance was born. So why do we engage with the gaming industry is because of the reach that it has. So we really truly believe that with the amazing reach we can influence the player base to take action for the environment. It's the biggest medium in the world, and it also kind of wins attention like nothing else. So those were kind of the reasons why we wanted to take the environmental action into this industry and launched the Playing for the Planet Alliance in 2019 in the Climate Summit in New York. And at the time, I think we had 19 companies on board. And currently, 2.5 years later, we are over 40 companies. So we are growing quite fast. We have very different types of companies involved. We have big console companies, indie companies. The only kind of criteria is that you have to have a product in the market. And the alliance is facilitated by us, UN Environment, and we kind of have specific teams that we work around. So one is decarbonization. So we encourage all the members and of course the wider industry to kind of commit to become net zero or carbon negative, hopefully by 2030, for example. And then another kind of thematic area that we work around are the green activations. So these kind of environmental activations that we can see in Alba as well. And through these, we really hope that the players can maybe change their behavior or take environmental action. And then in addition to that, we also have kind of these special initiatives as well. So for example, this year we'll be focusing on plastic pollution. So how can console companies shift into more sustainable packaging, for example, from plastic to more sustainable alternatives? And maybe just a few words also on kind of what for example, what did we do last year? So the members, including us too, and the 30 plus other members, they took more than 50 environmental actions. More than half of the companies have committed to net zero or carbon negativity by 2030. And we know that also because of Alba, more than a million trees were planted. And we also organized this Green Game Jam, on the back of which we also planted around 300,000 trees. So restoration was one of the key themes for that. So yeah, that's basically where we are and what we've achieved, and it's a pleasure to be here and talk with you about this. Maybe I'll hand it over to David to tell more about that, why us two wanted to be a member and what kind of commitments you have made.
Yeah, so again, on the back of working on Alba, we kind of took the opportunity to put our values just outside the product themselves. So we've always wanted, every game that we've made, we've put an effort in telling different kinds of stories and having characters that you usually don't see on the driving seat, like having a mother as a main character in Monument Valley 2, and kind of like representing a character as fully fledged as you can represent a character with no face and no dialogue, but you know, taking different angles to classic, let's say, archetypes. And as a natural evolution of that interest in the studio, we kind of like have started making games that are more and more personal to the people who make them. And in this case, we kind of like took this environmentalist approach. and we didn't want. It felt like the perfect game to take those values outside the game and kind of like reach out into the real world with different campaigns and collaborating with the UN and Playing for the Planet. We did the campaign to plant we wanted to plant 1 million trees. We've gone over that now. We basically pledged to plant like one tree for every single copy of the game downloaded by a player. And we reached the goal when we basically on the first anniversary of the release of the game, and we have continued planting trees since. I think we're in 1.2 million trees at the moment.
So where are these trees being planted?
So we're planting these trees in collaboration with Ecology, and they have, in turn, they're all their own partnerships with local sustainable plantations all over the world. So we are planting in Madagascar, Mozambique, and Nicaragua, 3 different plantations that we're collaborating with, and Ecology does all the management. And yeah, this basically, like, Alba for us opened the door to having this commitment to have an impact in the real world with our games, and I think it's been a turning point. Like from now on, we can't understand as to games without like doing something extra outside of the game and taking the themes and you know, and the stories and the things that are important and the values of the games outside, and kind of like bring it to the players and to people who are not players.
Yeah, mentioning that, because I thought on your website it says you as a studio want to bring what is meaningful about games to all those people who don't consider themselves gamers.
Yeah.
So you already said in the beginning that you of course designed Alba to be playable by children or young gamers. But how do you want to reach people that not necessarily consider themselves like passionate gamers, maybe casual gamers or people who have no contact to games at all?
So the way we try to do that is by lowering the barrier of entry, and that barrier of entry can take many forms, and one of them might be difficulty, and we tend to make quite accessible in the sense of approachable games like that they're not gonna punish you for playing. And we're taking, you know, like making visual styles that are, you know, have something personal to them, but they have like a mainstream appeal. They don't have a particular kind of like demographic bias, I could say, maybe. Like they tend to have this very broad appeal, even if they have like a strong personality. But the way we see it is that we're making games. The games that we make are meant to be played primarily for people who already like games, but they're open and accessible, approachable enough. Need to be careful with saying accessible these days, because it's taken on a very concrete meaning of accessibility options, and but we've used to use the word to mean approachability. So we're making games that people who like games will like, but also will see that can be played by people who don't play as much or don't play at all. So we've saw this with Monument Valley, where someone would buy the game and then, you know, encourage their family members to play the game themselves, and so on and so forth, and kind of like find an audience of people who would have never played the game because they would have never bought the game because they don't buy games. I don't think we can really make a game that's going to convince someone who's never played the game to actually pay money to play a game, but we can slowly, you know, put a wedge in there and kind of like open it up a little bit and get family members and friends and of gamers to be interested in games.
Yeah. So as you said, games are still mainly considered media. Of course, there are serious games, but mostly when you hear, okay, this is a serious game or this is an educational game, people tend to say, okay, then it's boring. and
Yeah.
so I think the difficulty for developers is to like convey real problems or serious topics, but still have that game to be entertaining, and so it is fun and or at least motivating the player. It can be a dark topic, for instance, but
Of
you
course.
need to appeal to the gamers, of course. So maybe this is a question for both of you. So what challenges do developers like have when they want to do a game about, say, the climate crisis or pollution or any other environmental topic, but still make it appealing and approachable?
Do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I can start. I think you can talk more about the development side, but what I think is important to kind of acknowledge is that kind of every game could have an environmental aspect to it. So I don't think it's about only developing educational or games that only consider how to solve climate crisis, but you can add these environmental elements into all games. Basically, it can be super small, it can be online events, it can be quizzes. Just depending on the game, they can be very small, or they can change the kind of fundamentals of the game. So I think that's important to acknowledge, and how we have addressed that within the Playing for the Planet Alliance is through the Green Game Jams that we have organized now 3 times, I think. So the idea of these jams is that you come there as a company with an existing game, so you don't develop it like in jams. Usually, I think you develop a game from scratch, but here you come with an existing game. And then you brainstorm together with other companies on how you could integrate different environmental elements into these games, elements that can educate the player or can encourage the player to take action. For example, there could be a tree planting within the game, like communal tree planting that could form a forest. And then the company, as you have done, could actually plant the amount of trees in real life as well, so that the players can see that the actions taken in the game can also impact to real life. So these actions can really be whatever. And I think that was interesting what you said earlier, David, on kind of when you were developing this, you didn't want to create messages that would be kind of on your face for the players, so that they would feel authentic. And that's really something that it's super important in the Green Game Jam as well. So that it doesn't feel it feels authentic to the game. It's still entertaining, even though you don't even notice that you take environmental action. You don't even notice that you learn about the environment. So I think that's what we are achieving or trying to achieve as well. And during the Green Game Jams, we have had several gaming experts on kind of exploring the issue, how to best integrate these environmental activations into games. We had an environmental expert telling about this subject. So we also encourage the whole industry to learn how to do this in the best and in the most meaningful way. And maybe just last point that I will add, we did this kind of it's not very scientific, but a survey still on the games that participated in the Green Game Jam last year, so around 30 or 40 games. And the majority of kind of player attitudes towards these activations were positive or very positive, and they were kind of they showed kind of bright and support in the sustainability efforts that they took within the games. So in general, the feedback that we got from the games from the players was really positive.
Yeah, I think like you've touched on a couple of things that like we really focus on. The one being you can put environmental. You can talk about your values in whatever type of game. Like it's not exclusive to having a certain type of gameplay. Like, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I was a big fan of Sonic the Hedgehog, who is an environmentalist character fighting industrialization. It is an action game of platforming, but the message is very clear in the way that it develops, and the bad guy is building these factories and robots, and you can see how nature like slowly becomes more mechanical, and you fighting against that, and really has nothing to do with the game being any more boring for it. It creates a really engaging world. I think in that when I was a child, there was a lot of I know like environmentalism was a big thing in children's media, I think. So like to me it's normal to have these messages in games, as much as it is on TV and film, and there really is no excuse to make them boring. That you have more serious topics, but we've kind of like grown used to serious like games marketed to adults having a very particular message. Especially action games tend to have a lot of like militaristic backgrounds, and that is that has a message too. Like that has politics involved in it. Like uh, the army is a part of the government, right? There is clearly a political message. So if you can have games that promote the army, like it's absurd that you can't have games promoting all the different values, and still have action-driven, fun experiences. So what we do is what we the way we I guess avoid being preachy like that and being in your face is that we try to create opportunities for the player to make a decision rather than telling the player you must save the animals because the animals in danger. That's bad. What we do is we put animals in danger and we give the players the opportunity to save them, but we don't tell them to save them. They save them because they can. And this whole idea of doing something because you can is very inherent to games. Again, going back to the example of um, militaristic shooters, you should because you can. That's what you do. Like that, your available range of actions is shooting, and and running. So if your available set of actions are picking up trash and taking pictures of animals and talking to the locals to mobilize them, then that's what you're gonna do. And you don't need them. You don't need to be telling them what's good and what isn't good. You can create those opportunities for them to figure that out by themselves.
Yeah, but there's always like for a lot of games that are open world, and especially when they have the freedom of the player who to take
Mm.
like choices and consequences. So I know a lot of
Yeah,
gamers that have fun like being the bad villain once, I
yeah,
when I play an open world game that allows me to have choices and consequences, I'm always the good one. I can't help myself.
yeah.
But I know so many people that have especially fun in being bad. So when you give the player the possibility to choose, there's always the danger of that. Okay, this planet is going to be very messy after
um,
that.
well, yeah. I mean, yes and no. Like it's interesting because this was a really big trend a few years ago of having these kind of like moral choices, uh, and looking at the data, about 10% of people choose to be the bad person, and they usually do it on a second playthrough. I think like the vast majority of players always play as the good guy, but having the option, knowing that you can be the bad guy, makes it all the more worth it to be the good guy, because that's a choice that you're making. And then you can say like, oh, what would happen if I was the bad guy? So it's really important that those consequences are portrayed in a meaningful way, because if you're the bad guy and the story is the same and the world stays the same, then like, okay, what's the point? Like I could have been like, the bad guy all along. So like it is, if you kind of like go for that, you really need to make it clear that your actions have consequences. And like there's something that this misbehaving is always fun. So and we've done this with Alba when characters ask her questions and she can say yes or no, and she has the ability to lie by saying no to things that the player knows is true. Very few people pick those options, and it's really painful, because I know, like, I think the funniest jokes are when you say no to questions that you know the true answer is yes. But people won't do that because they want, they do want to be the good guy in the story.
Okay. Oh, by the way, because I see that it's very quiet in the chat. So people out there, if you have any questions for David or Siri or about anything related to today's topic, so just post it into the chat, and I see it then. We already talked about what or slightly talked about what measures studios can take to achieve more sustainability. So you talked about packaging. Yeah, like we don't need those plastic packagings for games, especially now where we mostly can download a game digitally. But what else can studios do? I mean, of course, not every developer now starts developing games with environmental topics. So games about like climate change and so on. Maybe they still do very different games, but I think there are a lot of measures that any studio can take. So we talked about packaging. What else can we do?
I would like to know the answer to this question too.
So yeah, I think it's important to because studios are very different, so it's important to kind of consider where you can make the biggest impact, whether that is using your platform to inform and educate your players about these important topics, or whether it is something else, something that everyone can explore. A gaming company or any other company is decreasing your carbon footprint. So everyone knows that we are going quite quickly towards 1.5 degrees of warming. So we really kind of need all the industries on board, all hands on deck to kind of tackle the carbon emissions. So that is also something that we do within the Playing for the Planet Alliance. So encourage and advise companies to start first calculating your carbon footprint and then exploring how you could reduce that. And in this context, we talk about different scopes. It's very easy to start from kind of the direct emissions that your company has. So whether that is the facilities, the office that you have, how you can reduce the carbon footprint of your facilities, switching to renewable energy, thinking what food you serve, reducing the travel of your personnel, for example. Do you have company vehicles? So this direct, how do your workers commute to your workplace? So really these direct actions that your company facility causes, and the kind of workers, the footprint of your company workers as well. And then there are kind of these more difficult emissions to tackle that would be scope 3 emissions. So that would include, for example, the energy that is used for a player playing your game. So if that's a mobile game, so how much energy does it consume to charge the phone and play the game? And some companies within the alliance have calculated this as well, and then they use different companies to provide services to compensate these emissions that are caused by the players, which means planting trees, or even better, protecting existing forests, protecting existing forests of the ocean, so coral reefs. So the emissions that you can't reduce, you should, or you could compensate. There are so many service providers for this. Some of them are better than others, but the main idea is that forests act as carbon sinks. So if you protect a forest, the carbon stays there, and you can kind of compensate the emissions that you can't reduce, bringing your carbon footprint closer to zero. So that is something that each company can do and should do, and you can kind of start by calculating the footprint that you have, and then exploring the different aspects and how to reduce them.
Yeah, I see some questions coming in from the chat. Now the chat woke up. Thank you. Here's a question from Peter. He asks, is it harder or easier to get funding for a game like Alba, or does it depend where you are trying to get your funding from?
We made this game in collaboration with Apple. I'm pretty sure I can't share any details about that, but we showed them the game really, really early on. We had only been working on it for a couple of months. The tone and the basic gameplay and the basic characters were there, which is rare for us, I think. But it wasn't explicitly about environmental issues per se. As I was saying, it was running around this island, taking pictures of animals and helping the locals. And they really immediately liked it, and we started working together on it. They helped us fund the development. I think it was based on, they had a previous relationship with us working on the Morning Valley games, and they know the kind of quality that we deliver, but also the game's own merits. They were like, they liked it. But as development went on, they were really, like, Apple themselves are also really investing in the social impact of the products, and they have, again, another one of those award categories which we won was the Apple Design Award for social impact. So they really do care about this. So I think it's all about finding a partner that shares your values. That's the way that you can get the funding. Like, it's not trying to convince someone to do something they're not already convinced of. That is finding the right person that's going to believe in your product and kind of like help you build it the way you want it.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering why you chose like a Mediterranean island as a setting with tasks like collecting waste and taking care of the wildlife, which is mostly birds. Because when you think about like preserving wildlife, the cliche is like you immediately think about the rainforest, like the jungles need to be safe, like the
Yeah.
green lungs of the planet. But for us Europeans, the setting of Alba is like very nearby and very like day-to-day life. Why did you choose especially this setting and not some exotic or like clean environmental places?
Yeah, I love this question because that's exactly the identity of this game. Like, to me, like, I grew up in Spain. I'm from Spain, and when we started working on this game, there was just a team of two people, myself and Kirsty Kitch, who is a programmer and designer from our team, and she is from Scotland, but she also grew up in Spain. And when we started talking about a game about running around as a child in a natural environment, we kind of like naturally went to our roots and say like, oh, maybe we can, just to make it easy for ourselves, we can make it in a Mediterranean island, something that we know very dearly, and we knew how to do it, how to kind of like convey that sense of place, which was so important to create an open world game. You need to believe that that place is real. And that's kind of like, it started like that by accident, but then we realized that we can actually do a really good job of representing this place as a lived-in, living and breathing world. And that's one aspect of it. And then there's the other aspect that to me is super important. I think people don't realize how much wildlife there is just around us in the cities. And if you take your mobile phone and go into the garden, you can, take pictures of like 10, 15, 20 different little animals that live among the plants that you didn't even know about. And there's scientific communities out there that can help you identify them. And really is a love letter to this idea of nature in your doorstep, of the animals and plants that you're used to seeing every day. And unless there's something like this, like the mayor is building a hotel in the site of the nature reserve, that you actually stop and realize, oh, what are we losing by that? What is it that we have here that will be completely lost if we did something like this? And kind of like the beauty of the everyday aspect of nature, like all nature needs to be preserved. It's not just the rainforest. Like if we can't protect our own nature, how are we expected to care about the rainforest? It's hundreds of miles away. So you need to start by yourself, I think, in your own environment.
Yeah, Siri, the games that you see in the Playing for the Planet Alliance, do they have the same thought? Like let's choose topics that maybe are for like everyone. So not just, I mean, let's take for example the Fridays for Future movement, because they argue that real change can only happen on a structural basis or a political basis, but there's still so much that anyone can do, like as a single person. So the games that you see as part of the Playing for the Planet Alliance being made, are they like in a similar way like Alba, like what can every single person do, or do you also see things that are more on a structural or political basis?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think all of the studios kind of consider their target groups, which of course can be super diverse as well. But some of the companies we have on board make games specifically targeted for children, for example. So those kind of games and the topics addressed there are very different than in some I know, like in very strategical games that are played by a bit older people, for example. So I think there is more. I think it's kind of both. I believe we need both. So we need a structural level change, but of course the change kind of starts within the people. So if the people demand change, then it will more likely take place. And of course, the first step of that is kind of understanding what's happening. So sharing the information on the environmental issues that we are facing. And I think it's also super important to kind of provide ways to take action, because people can feel a bit hopeless as well at the times when only bad news are coming up on climate change and biodiversity loss and nature loss, pollution. But these games can provide little ways to take action and feel that you can also influence on a bigger scale by taking small actions. Players are planting forests, and if all of them are doing that, there is million trees planted. So that the action can grow quite big as well. So yeah, I think there are different ways that the games are addressing this. I think on kind of the structural level and learning about that. I think one of the great examples that was on board last year in the Green Game Jam was how I just mentioned the Anno. So Ubisoft game Anno, where you are growing settlements into big cities. And in order to play these games, players normally produce more and more goods to kind of cater people's needs within the cities. But in the Green Game Jam, they actually changed the whole dynamics of the game. So the environment will actually react to players' actions. So if you build like monoculture crops, then it really depletes the kind of island fertility. And if you do overfishing, that really destroys the food supplies for future generations. And if deforestation leads to deserted island. So I think that was a great example of a game that you can kind of learn about the more structural impacts of these issues and understand the cause and effect. So not only take individual action by planting trees, but actually learn about how these environmental impacts, how these are caused.
That's so cool.
Yeah. There's another question in the chat. Anonymous, actually, is more info available on energy consumption, please? So why you were talking, I was just very quickly Googling, because I know that we gamers consume a lot more energy than we would think. It's not only like our console or computer that is running, but there's also like the servers, for example, especially when you're playing multiplayer games. There needs to be the server running and so on. So that's a lot of energy that's consumed. By to give you some numbers, I just very quickly Googled. So please, if you want to know more, do your research yourself. But it says here, oh no, that's an ad blocking. That we are consuming, like, what is it? The equivalent to the output of 25 electric power plants. That's 75 billion kilowatt hours of electricity a year by all PC gamers globally. So that's quite a lot. Of course, you should do your math and like how many PC gamers do we have globally? What's the average consumption of every gamer? But 75 billion kilowatt hours. I'm not a physician, but I think that's a lot. And yeah, maybe you can start at the bottom and say, okay, when you want to be very or act sustainably, you should maybe better read a book. But that's not the message that we're going to convey today. So yeah, of course you can always do better. But since this came from the chat, I think everyone can, for each single person, can have a look into, okay, how much energy do I consume and which is really necessary. I mean,
Did we lose Viola?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh no.
Maybe we can try to answer. I think it's a really interesting point. Like, it's not just, we were talking about environmentally friendly packaging for games, and we tend to think like digital games are like just free of carbon footprint, but you need to download them from a server, and those servers need to be running all the time. Hello, welcome back.
talking about not using so much energy, bam, there's the internet gone. I'm sorry.
So I was saying that yeah, we tend to think about the environmental impact of packaging for physical media, but also the digital games need to be stored in servers and need to be readily available. And all that is, as we were saying, like structural change that need to happen. Maybe there are things that, like as you were saying as well, the idea of just changing your energy provider for a green one. Like the answer is not stop doing the things that you like, is to do them in a way that is not harmful to the planet. And what you have at your, like, that is available to you is change your energy provider, voting in your local and general elections, and vote for politicians that are going to bring about this structural change, and ask the big companies who are storing these games in servers and blah 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 to be ecologically minded. But I'm in no way an expert in this field, so I defer my judgment.
No, I think, of course, it's obvious that especially us in the kind of global north, we need to minimize or make our carbon footprint smaller. So that's part of it. That's part of our carbon footprint, the entertainment mediums that we use. The carbon footprint of individual person in the global north comes from how you live, so the energy that you are using for your heating, how you eat, and how you travel, so how you commute. So that's basically how your the elements that your carbon footprint consists of. And I think everyone should to count it and should explore what are the ways that you could easily change your behavior to decrease that, because that's obviously
Stop
something
eating
that we all.
animals.
So there are many different ways how you can do that. So that's for example one of them. So maybe start with the ones which are most easiest to you, because that's something that undeniably we all need to do. There is no other choice.
Yeah. Jeremy in the chat asks, how much of Alba is actually from your childhoods that possibly no longer exist in the same way?
I think a lot of things exist in a similar way. There are lots of personal things. There's like Alba's house. It looks very similar to the house that my grandparents had in the countryside when I was a kid, and Alba's grandparents had my own grandparents. But in terms of
Do they know that?
yeah, well, my grandma saw it and she didn't recognize herself, like, and she was the opinion that my granddad was much handsomer than the one in the game. But yeah, there's lots of places from real life, but they're not just. This is not necessarily a nostalgia trip. So we took lots of inspiration from the real world today. So these environments look pretty much like this now, and they're still, under threat today. I think some of the threats, they sound more like the threats that I used to hear about when I was a kid. And I'm sure that, but they're still valid. Urban speculation and development and all these things, they still happen. And I'm sure they still happen in ancient Greece. Like we have a tendency of doing the same things wrong, but we just need to keep reminding people that we have to do it in a different way.
Yeah. Do you have feedback from your fans and players? Like, I mean, it's a very different thing to go out in a game and take pictures of wildlife and picking up waste, and actually doing it in your neighborhood. So, how was the feedback from your fans? Do you really have players that say, "Oh, now that I have played Alba, I really started doing things in my own neighborhood"?
Yeah, we have, especially with children. We've had parents on Twitter tell us that after having played Alba, their children wanted to pick up litter that they found on the ground. Those are like really understandable actions, really work well with children. And I think for all the audiences, we've had lots of messages of people telling us that they've started recognizing the birds around them, and now when they hear a bird, they know what it is because of the game. And some people taking pictures of them in real life too, or they used to when they were children, and now they're doing it again because the game reminded them that they used to like that. So yeah, we've had a few.
That's so great. Well, people, I'm afraid we're running out of time. So we got like just 1 minute left. So I would like to take this time to thank you for being here today. This, of course, accounts for you both, Siri and David, for taking the time, and also Jenny. Thank you for playing Alba for us. It was a pleasure looking at the game while talking. And of course, everybody out there, thank you so much for joining the session. I'm sorry we couldn't ask every question that eventually popped up in the chat, but maybe there's a chance to reach out to David. I'm sure he that us2 is on social media as well.
Yep.
If you have any more questions about the game. And of course, you can also go to the Playing from the Planet Alliance website to get more information there, and maybe contact Siri eventually. So if you're a studio maybe that wants to do more in environmental protection, there's someone you can contact. So thank you very much, both of you, and thank you, Jenny. And while we take a short break, like 15 minutes, just to grab some coffee. And then it's going to be another Spielung with Beyond Blue in the next session. So don't miss that. And thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, hello. Welcome back to today's last session of the One Planet Left conference. Thanks for joining us for this session. It's called Beyond Blue, Exploring and Preserving Our Oceans. Again, this is what we call a Spielung in German, which is an invented word in analogy to Lesung, which is like a reading on stage. So basically, Jenny here will play the game Beyond Blue. While we are talking. I thank you. Thank you, Jenny, for playing. So my name is Viola Tensi. I'm going to be your host for this session. And of course, I have wonderful guests joining here. Let's start with Alan. Hi, Alan.
Hello.
Hello, Alan Gershenfeld. He's president and co-founder of Eline Media, a developer and publisher of games that help players understand and shape the world. He has spent the last 20 years at the intersection of entertainment, technology, and social entrepreneurship, was CEO and co-founder at Netomat, and had been supervising product development at Activision's LA studios. So Alan has worked on impact game projects with several renowned foundations and initiatives. He has been a speaker at numerous conferences and also on the advisory board and former chairman of Games for Change. But Alan has also experience in the film industry, where he worked in development, production, and post-production on numerous films and features and documentaries. So that's quite impressive, Alan.
Great to be here.
And Fritz is also here. Hi, Fritz.
Hi. Alexander will join us shortly.
Me? Oh, yeah. I think my connection just broke again. Oh, no.
Now we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear both of you.
Okay, good. I'm seeing myself with a little bit of lag, so maybe I'm the connection problem here. Let me refresh the page.
I'm back again. I'm sorry. My internet is very weird today, especially today. I was about to introduce you, Fritz.
I just refreshed the page, so hopefully it's better now.
Yeah. So you are a CEO and co-founder of Oceans 2050. And in your bio, it says you have been shaping its energy and concepts since your inception.
And the architect.
Yeah. I just read what it says in your bio because I think that's a lot. He applies his unique skill set to design the organism's ecosystem using architectural theory and practices while creating first of its kind digital tools for the ocean community. With a master from ETH Zurich and several years in corporate architecture, he runs a boutique studio for private residential clients based out of Berlin. Becoming a father shifted Fritz's lens towards generational thinking and the need for systems designs better suited for future generations. You now work to ensure that your children and grandchildren will live in an abundant and thriving world.
That's what we do. Yeah, I didn't write that. Sorry. So, yeah, I am an architect, and now I'm architecting ocean restoration, and yeah, it's great to be here. Love every time. Very happy to meet Alan. Every time I get him, I'm very happy. Very busy man, one of the great people we have in innovation for figuring out how to use these wonderful tools that are at our hands and that the kids are using to impact change and create agency. And we'll talk about this a lot. But we Alan, how long have we known each other now? Maybe 3 years.
Yep.
Tagging along, picking your brain has been really, really transformational, and wonderful guy. No, I mean you did Beyond Blue is sort of one of the most moving things I've seen on a computer game. Sorry, Never Alone, and Beyond Blue is great first step. It was super interesting to see the development. So Alexander's going to join us at some point soon. Let's go. Very happy to be here.
Okay, so maybe just very quickly, let's introduce the game itself, because from the description it says that Beyond Blue takes players into the near future, and there you go and explore the ocean through the eyes of a deep sea explorer and scientist called Mirai. So she and her team will use technologies to see and interact with the ocean in a meaningful way. And for the development, Eli Media partnered with like the BBC Studios, Ocean X Media, and leading ocean experts. And it's released on Apple Arcade, Nintendo Switch, PS4, Xbox One, and PC currently. So these are like the basic facts. But Alan, I'm sure you can tell me a bit more about the game.
Yeah, thanks. I'll give a little bit of background. As Fritz mentioned, our first game, Never Alone, we did with an Alaska Native tribal organization, bringing stories passed down for thousands of years into the video game format to reach a global audience. And the reason why I mention that is one of the things we did in Never Alone, it's a puzzle platform game, but as you play it, you unlock short documentaries about the Alaska Native people. And so it's this really interesting mix of gameplay where, as Fritz mentioned, you have agency, you take on a role, you explore challenges in a powerful context, but we also mix it with documentaries so you can meet the people who inspired the game. And that game was very successful. We've had over 10 million players. We won a lot of awards, including a BAFTA award, a British Academy Award. The BBC gave us a lot of coverage for Never Alone. And when we got to know them, thank you. Yeah, it's a lovely game, and it's lots of good stories about that game. But we want to focus on Beyond Blue here. So the genesis of Beyond Blue came about after BBC contacted us because they were finishing Blue Planet 2, which is an absolutely wonderful documentary about the awe and wonder of the ocean. And as they were finishing it up, they had a ton of footage, and they thought it might be interesting to build an ocean exploration game and unlock ocean insights the way we did cultural insights in Never Alone with some of their remarkable footage, where you could meet these amazing marine scientists, these aquanauts that are at the frontier of discovering so much of what we don't know about the ocean, our beating blue heart of the planet. And so we got very excited about that. We raised the financing and we made the game. So that was the genesis. And the goal was really to help players really just get passionate about the ocean, because we have to be passionate about the ocean if we're going to become collectively great stewards of the ocean. And we did set it a little bit in the future. So much of media today is dystopian in movies, TV, video games. We have a lot of these very dark visions of the future we wanted to create science-grounded, aspirational, but achievable, evocative visions of the future, and have some of the science enable us to dive deeper, stay longer, and really get to know these remarkable creatures that live under the ocean. But that was the genesis of Beyond Blue.
Oh, there's Alexandra. Hi.
Hello, hello.
Hi. So, let me just very quickly also introduce you. Alexandra Cousteau, you're president and co-founder of Oceans 2550. So that's a foundation focusing on the regeneration of our oceans. And in fact, you have been advocating for the oceans since you were a child, when you already joined your grandfather's petition to create an Antarctic nature reserve. You're also a filmmaker, public speaker, and advisor to governments and nonprofits. You have conducted deep sea surveys, campaigned for the expansion of marine protection areas, and investigated the impact of oil spills, and a lot of more things. You started, I got your bio, and it was like a whole page, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done in my life so far?
I've been doing this a long time.
So Viola, a little tricky here. So I'm actually German, right? I'm from Berlin. So maybe our paths will cross at home at some point. But I had the same. I married into this. So 12 years ago, I was a very, very different person. So I totally understand the sentiment.
Yeah. So thanks for being here too. Ellen just told us a very bit of the genesis and the goals of Beyond Blue. So what I was thinking is, okay, who is actually the target audience of Beyond Blue? Is it like for educational purposes? Is it for like casual gamers, core gamers, or maybe not gamers at all, but people who are just interested in ocean protection? So who you have your mind as target?
Can you stay in that reef for a minute? Just while you're playing, to see some of that. Just sorry to interrupt. Just to stay there.
So it's a good question, and it's always an interesting challenge for our game. So the short answer is we lead with entertainment. So we want this game to compete with gamers' discretionary time, which is it's a high bar. So this is a game that exists on popular platforms like Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo. It's Apple Arcade, but we want players who are curious about the world, curious about the planet. And it's been a mix. We've had a mix of people who come to the game because they love the ocean. They already love the ocean, and they want to play a game that explores the ocean. We have players that come just because it seems like an interesting game and they want to try it out, and hopefully it gets them more interested in exploring the awe and wonder of the ocean. So it's a diverse demographic, and I would say a diverse psychographic. We have young kids that play the game. We get a lot of, because Mirai is a real, we've tried to make her a very cool aquanaut, really a marine explorer, scientist at the cutting edge of a frontier, as cool as any astronaut you would see in space. So we get quite a few young girls that are really interested in ocean science and marine scientists. And that was very intentional. We really love it when families play together. To me, the best way to experience a game is when you're playing with other people and sharing it. Even though it's a single player game, we find people hand the controller back and forth and play and watch the short documentaries together. So it's a little bit of a diverse audience, but it does lead as entertainment. It's not designed for schools. It's not designed to fit into a curriculum. It's really designed for your kind of discretionary time.
Yeah. So I was wondering, because normally when you have like underwater settings in games, that's mostly you have to defend like shark attacks, or you raid shipwrecks, or like have submarines and fight. And this is more like a narrative game, and of course it has a very special topic like the protection of the ocean. So how do you think can compete games either Beyond Blue or other games that have like environmental topics? How can they compete to the purely entertainment and maybe thrilling games outside?
I mean, we debated that. The game definitely does have a very chill feel. There's not a lot of threat in the game, and that was intentional. I mean, there are stakes in the game. There is a narrative arc. You are tracking a family of sperm whales, and one of the it's clearly something is wrong. There's a health issue with the whales. And so as you get deeper into the narrative, we touch on things like deep sea mining and threats to the ocean and stakes, but we chose not to have a lot of threat to the player. And that was a particular choice. There are certainly numerous games where that is the case, that are very successful. I mean, games like Journey or Abzu, or lots of interesting games where there aren't necessarily shark attacks, but that there's still compelling interactivity, compelling gameplay. I would say it's more challenging. Games are about verbs. Sometimes they're action verbs, sometimes they're thinking verbs, and there's a blend of action and thinking verbs. And finding that right blend it's a challenge. It's not easy.
Can I take this one here, Alan? Because I mean, this
yes, please do. Please do.
Many people, so many things we've talked about over the past years, and as with any, to be honest, like watching this for the first time really in action, it feels pretty. That's pretty nice. It's a pretty like nice world experience. But you when for us at Oceans 2050, you mentioned that one line where we're focusing on rebuilding the place, right? And so if you take action verbs, so the first thing that I think any of these digital engagement interfaces need is that they need to really feel great, right? The world needs to feel great. The way you move in the water needs to feel great. So that's a great first step here. And it's always great to start with science and understanding. And for us, the really interesting tickets, one of the things we didn't mention about Alan is that he's also involved in a company called, is it Elemental, Alan?
Experimental
this
design.
Idea of sorry, I keep messing that name up. Where it's a lot about world building and future building, right? And sort of using digital virtual worlds and digital interfaces to help people participate in future building. And one of the things you always say so brilliantly is to get to a better place, we need a vision of where to go, right? That's a really important piece. And if that vision can be, if these kind of tools can be used to build, right, which is what we want to do, we want to rebuild the oceans. Now we're looking at the next work, in terms of what the next iterations of these kinds could be. What can what's a future where we can use a world build like this to make sort of the virtual rebuilding of our oceans something that people can participate in and take agency. And then, in the next step, like what we're really looking forward to is once we can do that, and we have the tools to translate what people do virtually or digitally to actually real world outcomes, we can use these kind of interfaces to have the whole world participating in actually rebuilding our oceans. And that's a really, really exciting thing to look forward to.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking of it, could you please elaborate a little bit on the work of Oceans 2050, like what you're actually doing?
That'll take a long time.
Well, I think the genesis of Oceans 2050 really came from this idea that by 2050 there could be more plastic than fish in the ocean. And that was something we heard about a lot about 5 or 6 years ago. And that really hits home for me because I really see the oceans through a generational lens, given that my father and my grandfather both saw the evolution and degradation of our oceans firsthand. The oceans were extraordinarily abundant in the 1950s when my grandfather invented scuba diving, and my father really noticed as a young man the decline of the oceans that he'd grown up in and started to articulate this conservation ethic for the oceans. And in my lifetime, we've lost half of our oceans. Half of the whales and fish and life that you see represented in this game are gone today. And so if my daughter is not going, well, our daughter is not going to be the generation of my family to write the obituary for the oceans, then we need to find a way to collectively rebuild them, so that participating and contributing to the restoration of our ocean becomes something that is joyful, that is collaborative, that is purposeful and constructive. And that means that we need to bring this to people where they already are. And I think one of the great mistakes of the conservation movement has been to ask people to come to the organization, to donate into a black box, or, do pick trash off the beach. And all of those things are fine. But I think that where we are really interested in lots of different ways is to actually go out and meet people where they are. And if it's in a video game, then how extraordinary would it be that we can play together and have real world outcomes that we could actually go visit together in the real world and see how we are building the oceans back to what they were together. And that has to be tangible. It has to be fun. It has to be rewarding. And it has to happen in the places that we already inhabit with technology that we are already accustomed to. Mm-hmm. And so Oceans 2050, we do it in a lot of different ways, through science and through digital platforms and through all of the ideation that Fritz and Alan have been working on. But that's really the fundamental idea, is that we can make rebuilding this ocean and this world something that we can work on together, and that we can experience together and have fun doing together. And that's why we see gaming as a great opportunity to build on some of the extraordinary work that's been done by Alan with Beyond Blue and other projects that he's worked on, to see how we can bring real world outcomes to the gaming community.
Yeah, if I can just, thank you, beautiful. Just to add like two lines to that. So the first thing, just for Oceans 2050, that's on the flag, is this just the shift from the conservation and protection ethic to restoration, right? And sort of this idea of restoring abundance as the goal of our generation. And that's really like the first most important piece. And we often talk about how that's really something that the young generations need. They need sort of a shift towards hope again and a positive vision, because it's a really dire time, right? If you read the news a lot, it's very easy to be dejected and feel like we're on a track that we can't really solve. And so, you said most of the important things. What we're really excited about, and I kind of like, if I can be really bold, we kind of see ourselves to sort of usher in the digital revolution of what used to be conservation work, and just using the tools of our time and the way that young people engage through games, or you said it before, the technology. We're used to having everything on our iPhone, and that's where we want to get ocean restoration. We want us to, the restoration of our planet. In our case, it's ocean, but we want to get to a point where it's as easy to participate in that and as fun as gameplay is, as booking on Airbnb, and sort of as rewarding and present. And we have all this beautiful technology that's evolving. Like when you're swimming past those corals, there's such magnificent innovation underway and already ready for launch, actually, that really reconfigures how what we think is possible, sort of in terms of what we can technologically do and how good our chances are based on science and the tools that are available to actually rebuild a place. And Oceans 2050, it's one generation. But sort of this is a really medium for the future. We always say, like, what if we could have kids play computer games to help in restoration? Like, that's where we want to get. Yeah. And this is one step taken closer there. Sorry.
So, I mean, I have been to the ocean for like holiday all my life with my parents as a kid, but you mostly stay at the beach, actually. So I had my eye-opening moment like about 15 years ago when I began as a surfer. Because as a surfer, you sit on the outside, you paddle out, and I had my eye-opening moment. It was in Portugal, and there was just so much waste floating around me. I was sitting on my board, and it was plastics and even like ladies' hygienic articles, which you don't want to have around you at any time, especially not at the ocean. And so that was the point for me when I realized, okay, I have to do something. So I started reducing plastic in my daily life. Of course, then you realize, okay, I cannot live without plastic. Plastic is everywhere. You can only reduce and try. But this was like a moment for me that was eye-opening, but I was in direct contact with the ocean. So I started supporting projects like the ocean cleanup, for example. But not everybody has the chance to go to the ocean and be there because maybe they live in remote areas or in the mountains or don't have money for holiday. So a lot of people, I think, never get to the sea. Do you think that games like Beyond Blue still can convey the feeling of being in the oceans and being there actually?
Well,
So
I mean, what?
go ahead,
Or maybe
Alexander.
Alan
Go
first
ahead.
because it's his game.
Well, I was going to try to connect what Alexander, Fritz, and you said, and I'm going to step back a little bit into theory for real world social impact coming out of entertainment. So the things that make games powerful are you step into a role and identity. In this case, a marine scientist and explorer. You have agency. You act. So it's not passive. You're leaning forward. You're not leaning back. You're often going into a challenge or a problem space. There's some sort of stakes, something you're trying to solve. And this is the crucial part, which I'm going to bring into the real world impact. You get feedback. A lot of games are about failure, but the failure is fun. The failure is evocative. But then you get feedback. You get feedback to improve and level up in whatever the goal of the game is. And that feedback comes from the game. It comes from peers. It comes from mentors. It comes from the community. And it just keeps you going as the gameplay unfolds, as the narrative unfolds. What we've been exploring, and we didn't get a chance to do this in Beyond Blue, but we hope to do this in future versions. And these are the conversations we're having with Fritz and Alexander, because I love the Oceans 2050 vision of the future, the aspirational vision of the future. But the crucial thing is that as you get agency in the game, we want to build agency into real world game loops. That could be citizen science, which you can do from anywhere. And there's amazing citizen science programs that people can participate in as we discover more and more of the ocean, because there's things the human eye can do that technology can't do. And that's a great thing for gamers to do. What we've been talking about with Oceans 2050 is imagine if there are gameplay missions where you are exploring coral restoration in the virtual world, perhaps using technology that's 10 or 20 years out, but then in the real world, you're having agency to help urge real world restoration projects. And the crucial thing is you're getting feedback along the way that things are improving. And you're getting that feedback individually, and you're getting that feedback collectively as a player base. Now, we're not there yet, but these are the conversations we're exploring. Now that we've built this entire ocean world, we've modeled hundreds of creatures, all science grounded, we've gotten to know the scientists. The next step is to continue to tell evocative stories, get to know these characters, get to know the ocean, but then fold real world agency and real world feedbacks into those loops. And the other thing I'll mention, another thing that I love about 2050, and Fritz mentioned the idea of world building. I think there's something very powerful about the time frame of 20 to 40 years in the future, because you're beyond kind of strategic planning, but you're not science fiction. So we can imagine technologies, partnerships, and practices that aren't quite there but could exist. And when you see them in the game, and it's like, well, why doesn't that exist? Let's collectively urge that into existence. I think it's a very powerful theory of change.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and to answer the question about whether or not this can make people feel close to the ocean, you know, when I am watching really for the first time the experience of being in this game, and I've been in the water with manta rays and with sharks and with humpback whales and with coral reef creatures and sea turtles and all of those little creatures that are so magical in so many ways. And this is wonderful for someone who's never had the opportunity to do those things, to be able to see how they move, the difference in the blues, the rocks, the corals, the seagrass. It's definitely gives you a sense of what it is in the real world, even if obviously you're just in a virtual world and you're not feeling the water, the temperature, and those things. But the way it looks and feels it's very similar to the real world.
I wanted to add one little thing, Alan, from our discussion. So there's a lot of technology that feels like that's out now. Sort of, we have it in the drawers, and it's about to hit. That feels like it's 10 years out. I mean, we often talk. So we'll be able to rebuild coral reefs very soon with artificial growing and 3D printing and all sorts of really, really fancy things that can scale. But just in general, like Alan, what we often talk about is the, what it could be to help, like, use game interfaces to help with the design of real world restoration. And as an architect, again, that's how we build stuff. We build a virtual model of it first, and then that virtual model is what drives the real world building. And so why couldn't we use that kind of a system for rebuilding things like our oceans, where the technology will have the plug and play points to be executed through virtual stuff? So we could have, it's really not that far out to imagine how kids could help with the design of virtual reefs that we then actually translate into real ones, and they could see what they design in a game sphere. Or this other thing you mentioned, they could see that come to life. Or Alan, I remember these really like eye-opening conversations with you years ago about like how you can use gameplay just to iterate things and like have people try stuff out in all sorts of, in a virtual space, have things try and try, because I think you said it's sort of 1,000 amateurs are always going to come up with a better solution than 10 experts. And sort of using virtual and literal like design is going to be really interesting to see what, where we can have people participate, even just in solution finding.
Well, and one of the big, I think, obstacles towards people being more involved in oceans has traditionally been a fear of the blue, a fear of sharks because of different films, a fear of, suffocating,
Guilty.
a fear of, the unknown. And so I think games like this, which, I think was so smart, Alan, to not put any threat to the player in this game, is because that would have reinforced fears that people have based on films like Jaws, where they had to use a mechanical shark because no real shark would ever have behaved that way.
Maybe it's not necessarily the film. I have to admit, when I do not have my board with me, I'm so scared. I never go swimming in the sea because I feel like I'm I'm in space. I'm in an evil surrounding. Everything here around me is faster and more dangerous than I am. And I feel so like an alien. Like I feel like I'm on a different planet. So that's why I never go diving, only snorkeling, if ever. But the strange thing is that when I'm surfing, I'm totally confident that nothing's going to happen. So I understand the fear of the blue, although it's totally insane, probably,
Well, the fear of the blue leads people to not engage, and that's a big hurdle for us, because when people are disengaged because they're afraid of whatever, of sharks, of whatever it is, they don't take action. And the oceans are typically the least acted upon of the Sustainable Development Goals. They're the least funded, the least engaged with, and yet they support life on this planet, and every other breath of oxygen that we breathe came to us from the ocean. And so having games like this where people can experience the ocean, they can get a sense of what is under the surface. They can see these creatures. Those creatures are not threatening. And in fact, they're interesting, and you can engage with them. And you can see places that need to be rebuilt and collectively rebuild them and see that rebuilding happen through the game. I think it is a wonderful opportunity for us to transform how we engage with the ocean and how people feel about the act of going in the ocean or rebuilding the ocean.
Give me a minute on this, Viola, because I can totally relate. It's like, again, city guy, exact same thing. The fun thing is, well, it helps when you marry into this and you're, kind of getting taught to dive. It changes once you're under the water. It really, like, diving is what changes that fear, because all of a sudden you're like, when you feel, when you're under there and it's not like this abstract thing, and you see these creatures interacting. That's why there were a couple of moments, I think, that a few minutes ago you saw sharks swimming peacefully, and the first time you see a shark swimming peacefully, you like, oh, right? It's not this constant ominous threat. Actually, it's just this marvelous world. Or the way that those whales were just circling. Like those are moments that I think are really cool, because for anybody who's ever, had their head under the water and felt the peace of it, really in the beginning, when you were talking about it, I'm so glad that it has this benevolence all the time. Like, whenever I watch her, I don't get my fear of the blue here. The whales are smooth and everything feels friendly.
Yeah, a couple of things. I was amazed how many people who played the game, streamers, people who wrote us, and fans are terrified of the ocean. So it's interesting that you brought that up because that came up quite a bit. So that's a very real thing that in a lot of these ocean conferences, are not necessarily discussed. And how do you overcome that? To build on both of those comments, the narrative focuses on this pod of sperm whales that Mariah and her colleagues have been tracking for generations, and it's based on real scientists that have been doing this, that have gotten to know these families over generations. Matrilineal, really interesting the way the aunties take care of the babies, and very relatable. The work of Dr. David Gruber, Dr. Shane Guru, who you get to meet in the game in these unlockable insights. You really get to know the social and emotional life of these cetaceans. And that's really fascinating. And that was very intentional. And we're not that far from the Rosetta Stone of understanding the language at some level, which is just remarkable. I mean, absolutely remarkable. And we do believe that getting to know the social emotional life of these families over time, which we try to convey through the narrative, it is part of breaking down the fear. Working with Dr. Mandy Joy, which was one of the other scientists, she's doing that at a biochemical level for these tiny microscopic creatures. And that's equally fascinating. You really get to know the life of these creatures and the fabric of all life. And so, again, we barely scratched the surface with this first game of some of these remarkable ideas. And in many ways, our goal in the game is to give the players the chance that we had to meet these amazing scientists and learn about their world. And, accomplishing that is a big part of the goal of the game.
It's really
you
beautifully
already
said, Alan.
mentioned your cooperation with scientists because of course you needed their guidance. Yeah. So since Beyond Blue is not set in any fantasy world, you didn't have like total freedom in designing the game. So you had to meet reality as good as possible. So but still so many aspects of the oceans are still unknown or undetected. So how much nevertheless did you have to improvise when designing the game? How much is related to scientific facts, or maybe did you have already fear in not meeting these scientific facts because of like technical barriers, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The way you phrase that, it felt like a little bit more of a constraint than an opportunity. What we saw when we talked to the scientists was inspiration for how we're going to create the game. So, because we're set slightly in the future, we asked the scientists, what would they love to see 10, 20 years from now in terms of how they do research? And that inspired a lot of the narrative and gameplay. And we built on that. I mean, we tried to make the environments and the creatures as science grounded as we could within within the tools that we have making games. I wouldn't say that was a huge constraint. I saw it more as an opportunity for exploration. So there are things that we do extrapolate. Like we're actually working on an extension right now in VR. And one of the fun things we're doing with that one is the idea of discovering new species, because in almost every dive, they discover new species at some level or new life, which I just find absolutely fascinating. And so we had really fun conversation imagining what type of species might be discovered in the future. And so that's science grounded, but there's a little bit of fiction there because they haven't been discovered yet. And we think that things like that are really fun to explore.
There's one more thing that I can add
Yeah.
from experience.
Yeah,
and
please.
so that's like, you touched it too, Alan. There's an infinite amount of zooming possible, right? So again, one of the perks of being married to someone who's so familiar with the ocean world is sort of when you get to a coral reef and you're, as an amateur, you get something to hold on to so you can stay still and actually look and have somebody pointing out all those tiny things. They're the most amazing worlds of millions and millions of tiny little creatures interacting. So this, what you have here on a macro scale can zoom down into all sorts of different micro worlds that are in their own just infinitely fascinating and really lovable. That's the great thing to like learn. So that I think it's a really great achievement, Alan, that the atmosphere here is so
There was an octopus.
is so loving, right? It just looks interesting. There's no that Viola, I can so much relate to the blue thread, and I think it's really beautifully taken care of here.
Yeah, but
Like that little
just to
scene came
note that
right from
I'm
a story.
equally. Yeah, but I'm also equally afraid to go into the jungle. So when we're talking about preserving the rainforest, that's the same. Just I don't want to get eaten by a tiger. But I just want to very quickly come back to what Ellen just said, that you like perceive that not as constraints, but like an opportunity to meet scientific facts. So I can imagine that there are a lot of more game development studios out there that would like to address environmental problems, like not only the oceans, but anything that could be covered when it comes to like preserving the environment. So, but maybe they fear like they have to meet the research necessary and match the actual facts and do the research, and that's also time consuming, I can imagine. So what would you tell these studios who would like to address environmental problems but maybe fear out?
Well, I mean, part of it depends what type of studio we're talking about. I mean, this is a craft; it's not a commodity. Just because it's a game doesn't mean it'll be fun. Just like making a movie or writing a novel. And so, if it's a studio that has shown they have great craft at making games, and it might be a young studio making their first game, or a studio who's made games for decades. That's a baseline. I mean, the game has to be fun. People have to choose to play it. It's an invitation that people need to take and stay with. The ways, again, I would argue, or I would suggest, that when you meet the scientists, it's generative for game ideas, not constraining. And you're looking for the verbs. You're looking for the organic alignment of whether it's a game mechanic or a narrative element or a character that aligns with gameplay that will be fun, with stories that will be compelling. And that means the best scenario, and we did this with our Alaska Native game, and we did that with this game, is that we spend time in their world. We spend as much time as we can on the boats in the ocean. They spend as much time playing games. That's the best scenario. They don't have to become gamers, but they have to get a sense of what it means to play a game. And when we spend time in each other's world, it just starts to become very generative. But we did a couple other things. This is great timing. The whale songs are just absolutely beautiful and stunning. And there was a generation in the 70s that heard those songs through this best-selling. Yeah.
We have to hop on.
Hop off.
We have to hop on.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, really?
Can we?
Yeah, yes, sorry. We have another conference.
We have
to
the
speak
conference, but we're listening the last.
But thank you for having us.
Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being
with us.
Ellen, stick with me. We still have like 15 minutes left.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care.
Okay, so it's just the two of us and Jenny, of course.
So I think
so maybe
you just saw.
Yeah, just go on. Yeah.
So I think you just saw on the screen when Mariah's in the sub, which she is right now, she can go to a music player, and we had a wonderful soundtrack. A woman named Karen Rackman works with. She did the soundtrack for Pulp Fiction and other big movies. So we did a soundtrack for the game, but in the soundtrack, that's where on that Ocean X device, you can actually play the real whale songs, and they're absolutely beautiful. And so we use the real world sounds of the whales in the game. And that's an example of where the real world science just, you're always looking for an evocative soundtrack and evocative sound design. And the fact that we could use real world sounds, and that in fact became part of the gameplay and part of the activities, is a great example of sort of an organic alignment of the science and the gameplay, and it's just absolutely ethereal, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. So by the way, because the chat has been
I'll
very
mention.
quiet.
I'll actually
Yeah.
mention one other thing, which is the ocean insights. I don't think any other games do this, and we do this in all of our games. The idea that you can unlock these short documentaries that enable you to meet the scientists that inspired the game. Yeah, I mean, so you meet Dr. Sylvia Earle, you meet Dr. Mandy Joy, you meet Dr. David Gruber, and you explore some of the issues in the game. This enables us to connect the dots as to where sometimes we've gone further than the science or we've extrapolated for the game, but we can contextualize that in these short documentaries. And we always make them optional. It's not like you have to watch them, but we make them short. We try to make them high production value and relevant to the game. And what we found is most of the gamers watch these documentaries. So the gamers might not watch a documentary on PBS or BBC, but the fact that it's on the Xbox, on the PlayStation, in the Apple Arcade device right there while you're playing the game enables us to mix the modalities. So some of the real science can exist in the unlockable documentaries when it just doesn't work in the actual gameplay.
Yeah. Okay. So I just really quickly wanted to mention that it's of course possible for you out there, for the audience, to post questions in the chat. So if you have any questions to Alan about Beyond Blue or related questions to our topic, just post it into the comments here in the chat, and then I will read that out. So I got another question that is maybe like a bit provocative, but not in the mean sense. So maybe in the game, let's put it like this: in the game, you take action by literally just pressing buttons. And for example, when it comes to like restoring a coral reef, this would take like a couple of minutes or at least some hours in the game, and you push some buttons and then it's there. Maybe lead this to false impressions to the players, because taking real action in like really restoring a coral reef is like a huge task that will take much more effort than just playing a game. Or what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, so I have a number of thoughts. The power of popular media is huge. So I don't know if you're familiar with the actress Gina Davis's nonprofit called, I believe it's called See Jane. And what she studies is things like gender identity in popular media. And in TV shows, when you have a strong female protagonist in some of these CSI dramas, which you do in a lot of them, it's been astounding the number of young women who want to go into that career because they've been inspired by that character and that TV show. And so that's one answer to your question. Going into a career, it takes a lot of time and a lot of work, and that comes from just passively watching a TV show. There are, and that's true in games as well. There are many, many city planners that played SimCity and became fascinated. There's folks that have played Civilization that have become historians. I mean, this is well researched and well documented. So the fact that an evocative TV show or an evocative game or a mix of both can inspire you to an entire career speaks to the power. So why can't it inspire you to become part of a restoration project? And if that restoration project is introduced to you, and we didn't get a chance to do that in this game, we'd like to do that in future versions of the game or future extensions. Imagine if you get the opportunity to participate in a real world restoration project while you're playing the game. And like I say, you're getting feedback that your actions are making a difference at some level. There's an alliance that we're part of that the UN started called Playing for the Planet. And it's about 40 companies, developers and publishers who have made environmental commitments. And they vary. They vary from like hardware companies going carbon neutral on their supply chain, big social mobile companies that have hundreds of millions of players looking at how to make their servers more environmentally friendly. But among other things, we did green nudges. So we took existing games and we did green nudges where, for example, in the social mobile games, you might take an action like planting a tree, signing a petition. And we had tens of millions, I believe more than 100 million players take actions. And those are real world actions. So we're just scratching the surface of how an inspiring gameplay or being part of a gaming collective can take real world action or inspire real world career trajectories.
Yeah. So your company is not. Have you already decided on making a sequel to Beyond Blue? Because you said maybe like you can expand the game, or based on your company's philosophy to like make games that are meaningful. Do you have any more projects in mind?
Yeah, we're in the process of. I mean, we definitely would like to make a sequel and have a lot of ideas and plans for sequels, including things like we've talked about. Not only extending the story, we'd love to go into multiplayer. This is a single player game. We would love to take the franchise into multiplayer. We have interest in television and movies around these characters, so the idea of moving into transmedia is of interest to us. And as I mentioned, we would really like to integrate things like citizen science and real world action into the gameplay. And we've been studying and modeling how to do that. At this point, it's a question of raising the funding. So we don't have the capital to fully fund these games ourselves. So we need to either find impact funders, which we've done in the past, or game industry funders that would partner with us to take these games to the next level. And we're in the process of that fundraising.
Yeah. So funding is a good topic because it's always difficult unless you're a AAA studio, like working on blockbuster games to get the revenue for the game to actually make it financially stable. And do you think that when you're addressing environmental topics, that it is easier for studios to get the funding because it's not just a purely entertainment game, but something that has maybe educational aspects? From your experience, is it easier to push such a game through for funding?
No, it's definitely challenging. You know, to date, most of our funding has come from ourselves and from the impact side, where folks want to harness the power of popular media to in this case get folks to be inspired about the ocean and good stewards of the ocean. Because both of our games have been profitable, we've shown that we can make games with meaningful themes, authentic voices, science grounded, and make profitable games in the entertainment space because we're playing in the entertainment space. We're competing for entertainment time. We've shown we can do that. Now we'd like to go to the next level. And to do that, we have to convince game companies that the game will not only be profitable, it'll be a level of return that meets their financial objectives. The fact that we're doing something that's positive, that they all support, but good intentions aren't good enough. It has to be a great game and it has to meet the financial objectives. If we want to get the type of budgets that we'd like to aspire to from the game industry. But we are getting interest. We're having very active conversations. But like I say, it can't just be good intentions. The game has to be really, really compelling and it has to compete as a fun game. But it's kind of differentiated because we're bringing these meaningful themes and this unique approach. And, you see that in film. I mean, many of the films that win Academy Awards explore very meaningful themes, or, some of the documentaries are breakout. BBC Blue Planet 2 would be a great example. So it's not like there isn't an audience that is, sometimes you want to see a Marvel movie, sometimes you want to see a powerful film or a powerful documentary. There are audiences for both.
Yeah. And I love Marvel, by the way.
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive. People are interested. Sometimes sometimes you want to play, you'll want to play an action game. Sometimes you'll want to play This War of Mine or Journey, or Beyond
Yeah.
Blue or Never Alone. So people like to do both. So often the same gamer will do both. Sometimes it's different gamers.
Yeah. So, have you made some research of what kind of people play your game? Are these more people like from what age or from what background do they come?
We don't necessarily have access to that because we distribute through Apple Arcade, through PlayStation, through Xbox. So because we're not distributing directly to the players, we get some data. but not a ton of data. We'd like to, as we look forward in our games, we would like to build more of a community. Like I say, we'd like to have more multiplayer, more social gameplay, more community aspects around the game, so that we could get to know our audience better and know who they are. Through the Twitch streams, through people who reach out to us, it's surprisingly diverse. We get tweens that are really into it, and we get grownups. I mean, there's a whole generation of gamers that are grownups and having kids now. So it is this particular game seems to have a very diverse demographic and psychographic that plays it.
Well,
and you don't need a
you.
lot of gaming. Yeah, you don't need a lot of gaming literacy. We purposefully didn't make the gameplay super complex. Now, for some hardcore gamers and even mid-core gamers, that was frustrating. It was a little too simple, the gameplay. But for newbie gamers who haven't played a game before, it was great to have relatively simple controls and to be able to move forward in the narrative. So that's a tough thing to balance, to make it simple enough that somebody new or a parent wanting to play with a younger child can experience it, but still compelling enough that a kind of a hardcore gamer finds the actual mechanics fun. Definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I believe that. Well, with the time in mind, I think we have to slowly come to an end now. There are still no questions in the chat, which is a bit sad because you have now the opportunity to ask Ellen directly.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, it was very, very interesting, I have to say. And watching Jenny play the game, very cool. So many great scenes and like experiences there. And yeah, if you want to check it out, of course, everybody out there, you can get Beyond Blue. And thank you, Ellen, for being here and talking about your game. And it's really, really cool. And I hope to see you at some conference in the future back again, maybe with Beyond Blue 2 or the DLC
That would be
or
great.
the expansion. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're
And
definitely doing DLC. We released a photo mode as the first DLC, and we've
okay.
had beautiful photos by the gamers. And we just released a second DLC, and there will be more coming down the pike that'll be fun. But Jenny, you did a great job. Every time we were talking about anything, you were right there in the game. So great job playing the game. It was perfect. And thank you for
Yeah,
hosting
she seemed
it
to have
and
some fun.
sharing it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you, Ellen, for being with us today. And of course, thank you to everybody out there who joined this session. So the One Planet Left conference is almost over now. Of course, there's going to be the final wrap up with Christian Huberts in like 1 minute. So let's say goodbye for now. Thank you for participating. My name is Viola Tenziel, and I say goodbye and see you next time. Thank you for watching.
Thank you. Bye-bye.